The season of Lent remembers the suffering of Jesus. According to the Bible, he fasted for 40 days. And so, for the 40 days before Easter, many Christians give up something dear to them, like chocolate or like alcohol. Many more, though, give up on those promises long before Easter. And it's not just a problem for Christians, of course. Most of us just don't have the self-control, no matter how good our intentions. So why is that, and is there anything we can do about it? Well, Leonard Green has some answers. He's a professor of psychological and brain sciences and also economics at Washington University in St. Louis, and he's been studying this issue. So, Len, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So why do so many of us fail in our promises to, say, give something up for Lent?
Well, there are a multitude of reasons, but certainly one would be is we look at the sort of the myopic view. We look at what's going on right now, and if I'm trying to give up cigarettes, say, well, I can have a cigarette now with that immediate pleasure, or I can live a healthier life, but that's delayed, that's over a longer term.
I'm not going to see those results immediately.
Well, right. And to make it worse, if I give up one cigarette now, that's not leading to a life of non-smoking. I mean, I don't get this incredible health, better life, a wonderful thing just because I give up one cigarette. So how do you frame it all in terms of what we would argue is a pattern of behavior? It's not a cigarette versus good health. It has to be a pattern of non-smoking versus a pattern of smoking. And that's very difficult because you're so focused on the immediate. And the immediate has, as my colleague Joel Myerson and I have shown that, those immediate rewards are just so overvalued in comparison to delayed outcomes.
I mean, just hearing you talk about this, I'm thinking I want to vote for the immediate reward. If it's, I'm one cigarette closer to not smoking again, or I can have the pleasure of a cigarette, I can see why people choose that smoke.
Well, there's the great line, presumably, by Jonathan Miller, the director, when he was on a Dick Cavett show where he was smoking, and Dick Cavett was saying, in effect, how could you smoke and all that? And he said, well, smoking may kill me, but this cigarette won't. And I think that's the way we see it, and that's the problem.
Yeah. So how can we get around that? Solve this for us, please.
Yes, if only. I think there are a number of things that we can do. One is, I think we have to realize that we can't look at an individual momentary act versus what's down the road a year from now or 5 years from now. We have to look at that individual act as part of a behavior pattern. Mm-hmm. Another thing, and certainly Lent, I guess, is appropriate for that, is what Howard Racklin a number of years ago did, referring to commitment, where I can have the cigarette or not, but how do I give it up? Well, you make a commitment where, say, Lent is approaching, and for Lent, I'm going to give up smoking for the 40 days. And you make that commitment sort of like a contract, but it could be a verbal commitment. You make the commitment in advance when you really do want to give up the chocolate, as you said, or the alcohol. But the problem is when that chocolate then appears in front of you, you want to eat it. So what you want to do is make the commitment in advance when you really want to forego the chocolate, so that later when now it's that next evening and now I want that chocolate, you've made this commitment. You mention it in front of your family. You're now less likely to go back on the verbal commitment you've made. So that's helpful.
Now, I know you and your colleague at Webster University, that's Professor Jetron Joe, have been working on a project about this. Is that part of what you're working on there?
Well, the project we're working with Professor Joe on has to do with individuals who are in distress, for example, from depression or anxiety, and how that influences their choosing whether to go for the more immediate or to delay the gratification and go for the long term. So we're doing a whole big study looking at individual cases of of depression, anxiety, and how that influences these choices.
I imagine that would have a huge influence. You always need the chocolate or the alcohol when you're under distress.
Right. So, so how do you approach that? The one thing we need to know first is, are these major, as you would say, self-control or impulsive decision-making problems? So we first need to see the data if that's true, and then move forward with, okay, how might we intervene to make this better? One technique for part of this that's been gaining currency is where, if you're given a choice between something now or something better later, it's hard to delay, and the longer it is, the greater the difficulty in delaying. One technique that seems to work is, instead of saying, well, do you want this now, or you can have something better but it's later, is start thinking about the later and what you would be doing then. How would you use the thing you're thinking about? How would your health be better so that you can actually be playing with your children and not being out of breath? That actually putting these episodic cues to that delayed event seems to help. And so we're thinking that that might well be true with individuals who are feeling depressed, sad, or anxious, to think about the later and what you could be doing then and how that might help.
Interesting. So you kind of are trying to train your mind to think of things in different ways.
Well, I would use different terms, but yes.
Probably more professional terms.
No, it's
Now, we seem to give moral weight to the idea of self-control, and so many of us just grapple with shame when we don't have it. I might be speaking from personal experience here. Do you think that's a mistake?
I seriously think that's a mistake. I should also say that Dr. Morrison and I don't really like using the term self-control and impulsivity because it typically has an evaluative judgment to it.
Because we do feel like this is
we feel
moral.
that, and we're blamed by others. And I think it doesn't give view to the fact that there are situational cues and constraints which might lead us to choose that smaller reward rather than go what's in our long-term best interest.
So what term do you like instead?
Well, first of all, when we talk about impulsivity or an impulsiveness, I'm not sure what we mean. There are different forms. For example, if I can't wait, I can't delay gratification, I'm impulsive. Well, but also if I don't take into account risks, well, now I'm impulsive. Well, if lack of forethought, we say, is impulsive, or relevant to this season, I can't, this inability to resist a temptation. Well, we refer to all of those as being impulsive or lacking self-control as if they're all the same thing, but they may very well be different and have different causes and different determinations. So to lump them all under self-control or impulsivity, I think, is going to be a problem in the long run in thinking about that and being able to intervene and do something about it.
Does it help us as individuals if we can better define what our problem is?
Well, yes. And I think if it's a case of I have trouble delaying, then there are techniques we might use to work on in increasing your ability to wait. But if it's a case of risk-taking, then that's going to be a different ball of wax. That doesn't.
I think that seems like the right idiom there.
So yes, and by the way, an individual might have problems with multiple forms of impulsivity. It's not necessarily just one, but this issue that somehow self-control is good and impulsivity is bad, I think it does damage to understanding individuals from situations. I mean, your previous guests, if you're poor, I can't afford to pay this a monthly amount. Well, now we blame these people instead of saying, well, no. Why do we go for payday loans? It's a terrible situation. But rather than claim such individuals lack self-control and they're impulsive, we have to understand it within the context in which they're living.
The issue might be they just simply don't have money. They can't make that bill.
Exactly. And now instead of blaming them, it sort of allows us to sort of ignore the social structure and the situation, which I think is a failure.
It sounds like there's a way that we can be kind to ourselves and also push ourselves to be better, that we don't have to judge ourselves as failures for letting go of the promises we've made or the better habits we're trying to have. But that maybe it's not going to be easy. So what is some advice you'd give to somebody who's setting out to, say, quit smoking?
Well, yeah, there are a number of things. One is I would tell them to speak to people who are close to them, as Dr. Joe has said when I was speaking with her, that think of the people you love, talk to them about what's important to them and to you. I think that is more likely to help you say, okay, I need to give up smoking because of these individuals who are important to my life.
Okay.
I think you need to put it in terms of your pattern of behavior. Don't think of it as an individual cigarette, but it's smoking a pack a day versus not smoking later. I think you need to make these commitments in which you say, okay, how might I go about reducing my smoking or giving up my smoking so that you're more likely to follow through on it. And I also think you have to realize that's, willpower isn't going to do it. And what you should be doing is thinking about your life in the future and what it's going to be like. And I think that might be very helpful.
Leonard Green, professor of psychological and brain sciences and economics at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.